All right, hello and welcome back to another episode of the Restored Mind Show. My name is Matt Cotty, and thank you so much for hanging out today. So on today's episode, we are going to be starting a brand new series about mass movements and understanding mass movements and even more importantly, mass manipulation. And, I felt compelled to make this series because just given the political climate that, we're in right now in the United States, and just kind of watching things unfold from a very broad level and kind of just wanting to share some insight on how mass manipulation works so that you don't find yourself getting roped into it, right? And you're able to, again, stay back from it to the point where you're able to use your mind and critically think, right? Because one of the things that mass movements do by their very nature is they remove critical thinking, right? Which is, again, incredibly dangerous, as I'm sure you know and have seen, and as we've seen in the past, right? Or it can be incredibly dangerous, I'll say that. And so in this particular episode, what I want to do is I want to talk about a high-level picture of mass movements and what that really looks like, and the three main components that really exist. And then as we go deeper in the series, what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually break down each component of a mass movement, and we're going to talk about it on a very in-depth level. And I understand that this might not be our particular brand here at Restored Minds with talking about politics and stuff. And I'm not looking to get into this specifically about politics, but I can't ignore it, right? You know what I mean? It's the discussion's already there, and in some ways it's like we have to look at this discussion from a high level, right? This isn't about persuading anything any way, one way or the other politically, but it's really about seeing things from a different perspective, right? Because some of the stuff that's going on in the States right now, it's just some really repulsive behavior. And in our last series, when we talked about the idea of making change and really understanding the identity level, I think we're really going to build on that in this series here when we talk about mass movement. So let's go ahead and break down the three main components of a mass movement, right? So the first main component is a charismatic leader, right? Every mass movement, more or less, that's ever existed has a charismatic leader, has a leader, someone who's leading the charge on this movement, right? And, in this particular episode, I'm going to use two very polarizing examples, okay? Because I think it's important that we see that this can be good or bad, right? A movement is just that. It's a movement, right? That's all. The question is are we involved in movements that we want to be involved in? And again, instead of just assuming that your movement's good, it's really stepping back from it and asking yourself these higher level questions, right? Because again, they can be good and they can be bad, right? The second component is a cause, right? An overarching cause of why the movement exists, right? In any movement, there needs to be, the movement's happening for a reason, right? If you think about any mission, right? You think about every movement has a mission statement, right? Well, any mission that ever exists is a movement against something, right? If you do any kind of mission, in the military or all that, right? It's like you have a direct opposition against something, right? Our mission is to blank, right? And any company, anything that's looking to create a culture, most organizations have a mission statement, and the reason is because they're declaring what they move against, right? And then finally, the third component of any real mass movement, any real successful mass movement, is a new opportunity, right? This idea that an opportunity, we're presenting a new opportunity to engage in, right? A new way of doing things. And again, I'm going to go back to this again and again in this series. That can be good or that can be bad. So let's go ahead and take two specific examples from history, and we can kind of look at them of how they work, right? So the first example I'm going to use is what I would perceive to be a good example of a mass movement, right? And we're going to use Christianity, right? So Christianity, I mean, is the predominant religious faith in, at least in the United States and obviously in other parts of the world as well. And when let's look at the three components though of Christianity when we look at that, right? So, the attractive character, right, or the leader, right, was Jesus, right? Jesus of Nazareth, Jesus Christ, right? And so that was really where the epicenter of Christianity began. And the cause, right, or, essentially the reason that this movement started was essentially to, he came to be the ultimate sacrifice, right? So that, we didn't have to, all the Old Testament rules and the offerings and, and all that stuff that happened with God. Jesus came to essentially remove all that, right? And essentially be the ultimate sacrifice, and the bridge between sin and God for people to, have that relationship and connection with God. And finally, the new opportunity that was presented is, hey, you don't have to believe, or you don't have to, do all these things anymore, all these rituals, all these, traditions. It's, hey, you just have to believe and receive forgiveness, and you ultimately have, a relationship with God and can go to heaven. And that was a radical idea, right? Back when. You got to understand, it's something that we've all heard, for the most part. But that idea was radical, back because they had lived so long a certain way, and this guy comes along and is like, oh no, well, when I die and rise again, ultimately I'll, you can receive forgiveness through me. I can be your sacrifice, right? And that was an example of, again, the attractive character, or the the charismatic leader, the teacher, right? Because ultimately we need to understand as humans, we all want to follow, right? Like we have this natural inclination to follow. And so when someone positions himself as a leader, right, we have a natural inclination towards that. And then the cause, right, and then the new opportunity. Now, let's go ahead and look at a bad example in history, right? And that would be the Nazi movement. Okay, so same thing, right? The attractive character, Adolf Hitler, right? The cause, right, to ultimately create a supreme race, right? And again, he positions his cause in that, and for all these, good things, right? That most movements will always be in the name of good, right? It's your critical thinking that's going to allow you to see it for what it really is, right? And as we talk about in this series, I want you to start to see that we all can get manipulated. Everyone has the capability of being manipulated. And it's so important to realize that, because if you think you can't be manipulated, you're almost guaranteed you are getting manipulated, right? If you aren't aware of that, your susceptibility to it is so high. And, so the cause is, creating this supreme race, and the new opportunity is, hey, we're going to eliminate a bunch of people, right? Anyone that's not part of that race, to ultimately create this, so it's like, wow, you got to do this bad stuff to get to here, right? And it's interesting how easily the manipulation can lead people, again, to doing acts that they never saw themselves doing, right? And if you look at any, again, cult, right? Essentially that's what it is. The root word of culture is cult, right? So if you look at any cult, it maintains these three things, right? And a cult leader, right? And then you go into the cause, right? And then you go into the opportunity. And, you look at things like, the Manson family, right? You look at, it's really interesting. I have a real fascination with studying cults, because you see what people will do when they really get ingrained and indoctrinated in a cult. And, right now I think it's very prevalent in our society, because what we have is essentially identity politics and identity culture, right? Political culture, right? And people have been adopted political belief systems on both sides, right? Again, that, and then they ultimately identify with it, and are, again, behaviors being done that is, in some ways, really, really awful behaviors are being acted out, and understanding how that happens is important, because it's to help make sure that you don't get roped into that. Right, and that's really why I wanted to make this series. And so those are the three main components of a mass movement. And then again, as we go in the series, I'm going to take each one of those and I'm going to break them down so that we understand, on just an in-depth level, each aspect of that and how it works, and what movements do in each of these levels to really, again, create a mass movement and in some ways manipulate the masses. And I just, my hope is that through this series, you can start to see some of the things that might be happening in our culture. If you live in the States, that might be happening that you could fall prey to, that hopefully you're able to see and recognize and sidestep, right? And again, maintain that aspect of critical thinking. So, for those of you who found this valuable, again, over at restoredminds.com, we have a bunch of free resources, and we have some links down below where you can access those. And please, as always, we always appreciate, you subscribing, liking, sharing, this as well, to help get this information and these resources to people. So thank you so much for taking the time to hang out today. And again, I will see you in the next episode, where we're going to dive in depth to the attractive character and what really goes into that of creating a mass movement. So thank you, and I hope you guys have a wonderful day.